Hey, I'm Austin, product designer at GitLab. I'm going to be talking from a slide deck today, but it mostly is all just following one merge request. I'm just going to be specifically highlighting a few things to keep focus on those items. The theme of this topic is talking about designing within a merge request. So it's getting design decisions closer to the actual change that's being considered. And as a launching point for this discussion, I just wanted to quickly highlight that we are working on a better way to structure our navigation and our settings. That is one aspect that my group has been touching in certain points and been maybe a bad contributor to in the past at times. And so with some of these challenges like unintuitive naming, difficulty finding things, we're trying to become more objective in the way that we go about doing that research, which Kat had a great presentation, what we were talking about in our weekly meeting yesterday about. So how do we handle like those really small changes? There was an issue that was given to me a while back of just like, hey, let's rename push rules. We've put more things underneath there in the admin area. So now it's not just push rules, it's also other things too. So then what do we do with opportunities like that? And I know numerous people have come up against this type of problem. Well, the first thing I thought about doing was going back to our handbook, which I think sometimes we forget that it encourages actually to start with a merge request if possible, and then lean on issues. I think sometimes that gets confused. Not everything starts with issues, it actually starts with a merge request. And in this case, it was a really small change. So I started with just like proposing a rename to push rules in the admin area. And from there, you could visually see the difference here. Like what was a change? It was a change to the icon and a change to the navigation label in the left-hand nav. And how we came to that decision was a discussion with like Mike Nichols and Mike Jang, like pulling in other designers from different groups to talk about this because it was more of a shared area of settings that I didn't want to have the sole voice to. I wanted to bring in other designers' opinions and other contributors. But we could actually talk about an actionable change here because it wasn't just like drafting something in Figma. We were actually talking about like, okay, well, what's the icon we will replace it with? What's the text? How does this feel? What does it show? It's a little bit more direct in terms of where we're focusing the discussion on. And then even tying in some of the discussion around how are we going to actually go validate this thing? So what do we do with this next? I wanted to think about, okay, we have an idea, but are we ready to merge it yet? And so was it ready to merge? I was saying no. Like subjectively, I thought what we came up with was a good change. And perhaps it could be merged in. Anybody could go in if they really feel like it. We could change it out of draft and put the change in, which is great. That makes it very actionable. But I want to look for some more objective feedback. So going back to Kat's original problem of improving our left-hand navigation, improving the way that we can discover settings, I want to have some more data-driven decision-making of why we're actually making this change. And so I was looking to some options for unmoderated testing. So this is kind of where like I'm at in my journey today. And I found a couple options because what I want to do is essentially run like an A/B test. Given the current structure today, can you discover settings A and settings B? And then compared to the change, can you find settings A, settings B, and then compare and contrast them? What I've seen is we could use Gitpod to do this. I think this would be awesome. I could just share a direct link, which would be super easy, tying that into usertesting.com. Biggest con is it times out for 10 minutes. So I would have to be like actively managing it to make sure that it stays open while participants are actually conducting the sessions. Another option is the workspace snapshot, which doesn't require me to keep the environment live. However, it does require that someone already has an account with GitLab, GitHub, or Bitbucket and already uses Gitpod. And then they have to wait for it to build, which would probably exceed the time allotted in a short test, which I think is like supposed to be under 10 minutes. And then also there was like that consideration of using a GitLab, the demo site. The problem with that is it uses like the latest build that's been released, not like a specific branch. So this is an example where I want to point to a change that's in development. We're not actually like, this hasn't been released yet. Although GitLab demo would be super useful if you wanted to test things that you've already released in the past as a way to get some objective feedback on a feature you released. I could see one problem though, users all using the same space at the same time, they could be doing things and then it could make it kind of confusing if they're supposed to toggle something on and off and someone's both toggling it on and off at the same time. That might be problematic. So haven't really figured out all the kinks yet, but my goal is to get to faster unmoderated testing so that we can have better decisions for something small, like renaming an area of the product. Wrong direction. My biggest concern though is like the license requirement stuff. I've redacted some information off of this so that you can actually see who it was tied to. I haven't figured out what license to associate to the Gitpod environment or to like demo. You can go into those things through the admin area and download a license. I don't know how that exposes us in terms of vulnerability risks or like what that even means in terms of, we have 50 or 530,000 users over the license number allotted. I don't know what that means, if that matters. So I'm still trying to figure out how do we get like a temporary license for some unmoderated testing so that we can use some of that production ready code to test with users. So my next steps is figure out the license, decide on a testing solution. I still am leaning towards using Gitpod and just kind of like clicking refresh to keep it open and like just seeing how it goes with 5 or 10 participants, just to test that out. After doing like a screener survey and then see the results of the A/B test. I would love to see, yes, users were able to more easily find this niche setting because we renamed the navigation item and I can tie back to that objective data rather than just saying, yeah, me and the 2 mics thought this was a good change, so we're going to put it in. Ultimately, that's where I'd love to go. I would love to hear anybody's feedback if they've had a better way of doing this. Or getting that research, because what I heard from Kat yesterday was we all want to do this research, but the mechanism of the how do we actually go implement it? I think that's the challenge.
Looks like we have a couple read-only questions, but if anyone wants to verbalize them, that's okay. Still have time.
I'll read my read-only. I was just saying that I've also been thinking about these workspaces and how we can utilize them. And I also had some of the privacy concerns. So if you want to collab on this, I would love to do so. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to collab on it. I think Gitpod's great. It really does do a lot of the hard work for us. It can be a really cool tool that we could use for user testing. I think as long as we work out some of those kinks of making sure that we're like not exposing licenses unnecessarily or just finding a way to prevent abuse, then we'll be good to go. And we can start getting some really good feedback loops on how we're going to change the navigation and layout structure and discovering settings over time without having to do a bunch of moderated sessions.
I unread-only mine since there weren't many comments. This is awesome. I'm so glad to see you exploring this. I agree. This could be so valuable if we can figure it out. So someone at GitLab knows the answer to this, and they probably know it. Like if we put it in front of them, they just go, "Oh, you just whatever." So don't beat your head against a wall. If you need help tracking who that person is down, I'm happy to help you figure that out. I'll start poking people to see if we can get a name. So if you want that help, let me know.
Yeah, no, if you want to vocalize that to people that you know, that'd be great. I've been poking at the people that have been kind enough to provide links and references to other areas. I've just been trying to ask more clarifying questions like, hey, you said create a temporary license. I don't know what that means. I've opened up an issue to create a license, but I don't know. There's not like a use case for this. So it might be, treading through water for the first time and having to define that. Another handbook change, perhaps.
Yeah, if you can give me a short summary of what you want to do and the blockers that you're running into, I'll post that in the Quad Leadership channel. And both Christopher and Mech are in there, and they can probably point us to the right person.
Will do.
Just to kind of follow up on that, like I do think the demo team can make versions or retroactive versions of the platform as part of the demo, because when I was doing my testing a while back with the demo team, they had defined a lot of parameters within the environment. So perhaps it's worth double checking, or if you have asked that already.
Yeah, I did ask the demo channel about this. From what I gathered, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, they're saying like, I think you can go back in versions, but if this change never ships, you can't like point to it. I think that's where the crux is. The things that we do in development, they're not going to be on the demo site. Whereas like I could refer back to 13.8. I think they could set that up for me, but it never was released because it's still technically in solution validation. So. But yeah, even still, the license thing is still a possibility of someone could go to the admin area, go to the license and hit download. I don't know what that means. So got to go figure that one out.
Basically, they get a free copy of GitLab.
Yeah.
You want to verbalize, Catherine?
Sure, yeah. So I would say this problem I've seen come up, but the goal of the research will also determine what you can do. So for example, with the renaming of push rules, you could rely on something like first click testing or tree testing and just strip it back to the actual naming change and location change, and then you would get around the need for licenses. But if you are testing aspects of the navigation design, I'll give you an example. So you have the push rule one, and then you have I think the one about unifying keys and tokens. So in that one, you have more design changes around how the settings are actually displayed. So I can see that bringing in more conversation around the licenses and the design aspect. But for the renaming push rules, you could go with the first click test or a tree test and just focus on the IA aspect and not have to go through all the rest of the things.
Yeah, those are really great points, Catherine. And I think it even brings up a couple of the sub-bullets that are underneath, like Andy was asking, wouldn't a prototype suffice in this situation? Possibly. I have a hypothesis that like the admin area is a challenge to find a niche setting. So like the task I want them to find is like restrict committers. I'm not telling them it's under push rules, but I don't want to have to go create all of the different pages in the admin area. I just want to be able to give them this change because it's already there, and then give them the environment to actually plan and see how hard is it for them to actually find it. If it was just a prototype and the only hot link was push rules or source control as we were renaming it to, it might bias their outcome because like it would pretty quickly force you into the right direction. And I'm more interested to see, given the true live environment, can you actually find the thing you're looking for? It might not be, it might be overkill, but I was hoping by doing this like one time, I could learn from it and then share the results. I just didn't get to the point where I could share the full results yet. So I'm sharing the progress I've made on it so far. But great questions though.
Yeah, definitely. I think for the hot link thing, I think Beck and I were collaborating on a prototype that we launched through Figma. You can hide all of those, right? So you're kind of prompting the user to complete a task, watching them struggle, and even if they get to the right place after a few clicks that don't go anywhere, you kind of know that there's probably an IA problem. So it may not need to be like a full-blown working site or prototype. It's just enough to validate, can user complete task, or are we setting the user's expectations correctly quickly?
Yeah, no, I totally vibe with that. I understand where it's coming from. I think the benefit of being able to test a small change is might as well give them the whole thing just to see. Do you get stuck just digging through the main top page because that's where you landed and you think it's somewhere on this page? Those are aspects that would be missed, I think, in a prototype if it's a small change. Obviously, like a whole page redesign is much harder to do, but something as small as just like relabeling a field, I think it could be a worthwhile experiment. So we'll see. Maybe not. Maybe not. And Mike, you mentioned review apps. Did you want to talk a little more to that point?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a minute since I was on review apps, like a year ago or so. But I mean, when we talked about review apps, when I was briefly on it, this was one of the use cases that we definitely wanted to solve for. Was we need to be able to do things like this, spin up an environment so you can test things and you know, kind of a one click, here's a URL, go check it out. Here's an environment that works. It hasn't really gotten there, I don't believe. And there are a few little issues with it, but back in the day, this was exactly the use case that we were striving for in review apps.
Yep. Yeah, and in full transparency, I don't know how to set up a review app. That's probably my highest barrier to entry to it, is I need to go read more documentation on how to actually make that happen. And perhaps it does solve this problem too. But so far, I've gotten as far as exploring Gitpod. Gitpod's workspace is being shared, and then demo site. So review apps is yet another option I could look into. All right, I think that brings us to the end of the questions. Thanks for all that.
I saw that Pedro made a comment, and I was wondering if you wanted a chance to verbalize.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay.
So,
no, I can verbalize. No, but no, yeah, I think you can read it. It's I think a follow up to what Catherine was saying, but nonetheless, I think there's a lot of value in what you're trying to find, and I think this example that you gave and that you're trying to test might not be the best example to demonstrate what you're after, but I think what you're trying to accomplish is very it's much needed. And to what Mike Nichols was saying about having the review apps, that's what we want when it's something that is very complex and users need to go through a flow that could be arbitrary. Like we want them to explore, or we want them to fill in whatever they want in a form. That's much harder to do with a prototype. And so if we have the real thing, it's much easier. So yeah, I think that's something that we should solve. About the test itself, as others have said, I think it's thinking about what is the minimum viable test, right? When there's that thing with paper prototypes and even other kinds of prototypes where you fake everything, right? So it looks like it's working, but it's not working. So I think it's just being a bit more creative with what is the minimum thing that we can do to get reliable data. And to Catherine's point, I don't know exactly what is the terminology, but I think there's a very high correlation with the first click in tree tests. So even if you don't show the page after users click into it, just knowing that they click there is a very good indication that they would either find the right thing or that they would be lost. And I think there's research that backs that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that supports like Andy's position on like try prototypes, when Kat's opinion on like tree testing, first click testing, that could help you here in like a much more succinct format. I think, but you brought the exact reason why I think I was going down this track of, I think this will help set the foundation for better testing in the future. And this is such like a small change that like, it's really not the change that's the hard part. That's small, that's easy. It's more the logistics of, well, how do we set up the environment that we can share? How do we make sure that it's, secure enough that we can do that and it will work for the people that access it through usertesting.com. Then when we want to do like a form, great, now we have all the mechanisms already hammered out and we can move much faster now.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you separate the two things, like one is to test the small thing that you're very interested in, and like, should we call this source code or push rules or whatever it is, and separate that from the other very valid challenge that is setting up these more complex testing environments. And those two are very worthwhile to complete. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I was saying earlier, the best part about being an merge request is, whenever we feel like it needs to go in, it's ready to go. Pipelines have passed. All right, thanks for coming.